Zelenskyy, he's a great egotist, and he hates the idea of turning up, being grateful and sort of bowing and scraping for all that we can give him. He turns up and he says, we're all in this. I'm a European leader, just like you, and I'm telling you, leader to leader, you need to do much more.
Andy Burnham's first foreign visitor is Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and this is why. Hi, I'm Mhari Aurora, and welcome to another week of This Is Why. President Zelenskyy travelled to the UK to meet with the new Prime Minister Andy Burnham today, but it was more than just a formal introduction. Not only has Number 10 said that this demonstrates the UK's unwavering support for Ukraine and the strength of the relationship between the two nations.
The whole question of anti-ballistic missiles and the supply of them to Ukraine, particularly in terms of Ukraine protecting critical national infrastructure during the winters that can be very harsh in Ukraine. So we talked at length about that issue. We've taken away some things that we will now follow up with our partners. Overall, it was a very warm meeting. I thought I would get on well with him, and I did. We got on very well indeed, and this is going to be a close partnership. I intend to visit soon.
But it also reveals something about Andy Burnham. It shows us that he is keen to prove to the nation that he is capable when it comes to foreign policy and defence, something his critics have pointed out he has little to no experience of. Burnham will also hope it sends a message to the UK's international partners and adversaries that despite the political merry-go-round of recent years and the revolving door in Number 10, that the UK remains a solid defence power. I'm joined by Professor Michael Clarke, Sky's military analyst, to discuss why this visit matters. Professor Michael Clarke, thank you so much for being with us. We're talking today about this visit from Zelenskyy to Andy Burnham. Talk us through, to start with, what the purpose of this visit actually is and how much influence the UK can realistically have on Ukraine.
I mean, the visit suits everybody, so it suits Zelenskyy to be the first foreign leader invited to the United Kingdom, and it suits Andy Burnham to show that he's continuing with the policy of being very close to Ukraine and tough on Russia. And there are issues about whether Andy Burnham will really increase defence expenditure, but at least in terms of orientation, he will continue with that tough line that Keir Starmer took. Goes back to Boris Johnson. When the Russians invaded, full-scale invasion in February 2022, Johnson, I think, was one of the first Western leaders to see immediately that Russia had crossed a Rubicon, that there was no way back. And for him, it was a Churchillian moment. And he led the Europeans in standing up to Russia on this. He was even ahead of the Americans with the Joe Biden administration. The Americans got a bit irritated with the fact that Johnson was saying things that they thought maybe shouldn't quite be said. So Britain took that view immediately in 2022. There's been continuity since then with other prime ministers, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. So Burnham wants to stay in that line of continuity. So it suits Burnham to have this meeting, but it also suits Zelenskyy because he's on his way to America. So he's got an important meeting coming up in the middle of this week with Donald Trump.
So Andy Burnham's the pit stop.
Burnham can reinforce Zelenskyy's message. He can add strength to Zelenskyy's message because of the other things they're talking about in this meeting, some of the cooperation that's actually taking place.
So what are they going to talk about in this meeting?
Well, Zelenskyy is partly overseeing this exercise that's been taking place, 200 Ukrainian personnel, and he'll be talking to them and meeting them when he goes to Portsmouth, the big main British naval base on the south coast. And they've been talking about Black Sea security there and mine countermeasures, demining and so on, keeping the Black Sea safe. So there's that. And then Britain is announcing that with Stone Cloak, this particular system called Stone Cloak, they're transferring the intellectual property, the IP of that, to Ukraine. And there's a big issue there, very important symbolic issue, that they should be giving the ability to produce Stone Cloak, this anti-drone detector system. It's a way of preventing the Russians from interfering with Ukrainian drones. And then the other thing Zelenskyy will take to America with him is that sense that the Western allies are being very practical. Look at what they're doing. Look at all the arrangements we've got with Thales and Leonardo and BA Systems. We are helping ourselves, Mr. President, is what he will be saying. And also, the Ukrainians have struck an Iranian vessel, more than one it seems, in the Caspian Sea, taking Russian aid to Iran. And the Ukrainians are saying, look, Mr. President, the Russians are helping your Iranian enemies. They're doing it. We're helping you, stopping them getting Russian aid across the Caspian. So he's got lots of messages he wants to impress on President Trump, because I think he feels that this is the moment he might get Trump to really lean on Putin much more strongly than he ever has wanted to do so far in the coming months.
So Stone Cloak, then, these devices, it's a British-made invention. I mean, Andy Burnham said that it's a kind of a demonstration of homegrown tech that we are then being able to kind of deploy and hand out to Ukraine. So is that a success story then for UK defence, I suppose? Yeah,
it's a success story for startups, for the sort of high level of small, innovative companies that we've got. And it's a system, we don't know much about it, and nor should we, because it's highly sensitive militarily. But essentially, it's something that is it's like a unit about as big as a sort of a small iPad, and that unit can be put into drones that are on their way into occupied territories in Ukraine or even inside Russia. And it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for the Russians to jam that drone. And that's really important to get through Russian defences. Now, the Russians will find a way around this. I mean, at some point, they'll pick up one of these drones, they'll capture one intact, and they'll have a good look at it, and they'll reverse engineer it. So they'll have to keep upgrading Stone Cloak. But that's the nature of the idea. You never produce a weapon now that's still relevant in 5 years' time. It might be relevant for 6 months or a year, and then you need Stone Cloak 2, Stone Cloak 3. Sounds like a film franchise, doesn't it? And so you need to keep upgrading it. But that's the idea. And by giving the intellectual property to Ukraine, they will be able to produce it faster than we can, at scale, as they say. They'll produce, hundreds of thousands of these things, which is what they need, not the sort of dozens and hundreds that we tend to produce. And then they're testing it even as they produce it. It's not very often that defence industries get the chance to test things even when they're still in the production process. But because there's a war going on in Ukraine, this stuff is being tested on the battlefield and upgraded constantly. Normally, with defence procurement, something is tested to within an inch of its life to 98, 99% reliability, and then 10 years after it was ordered, it's given to the troops. Well, it doesn't work that way anymore. As soon as something starts to work, you give it to the troops, and they will tell you pretty quickly which bits of it are useful and which bits are not, and then you take it back and you work on it until it works better in battlefield conditions. That's what's happening here.
So with Stone Cloak, could it potentially benefit us in the UK, even though obviously the Ukrainians are making the most of it?
Absolutely. We're trying to develop our own drones, just like the Ukrainians do. We're not doing this in big contracts with the United States anymore. We're producing them ourselves. We're working much more closely with Ukraine in some ways than we work traditionally with the United States. The other thing I ought to say, Mhari, is that it matters to the Ukrainians. Two things are really helping the Ukrainians at the moment. One is the suspension of Starlink. The Elon Musk system, the Russians are cut out of Starlink. So the Russians have a problem with communications. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the Ukrainians are being much more successful, partly because of Stone Cloak and other systems, but of getting their drones through. So they've got their drones through Moscow defences regularly, Petersburg defences. A couple of weeks ago, they attacked Omsk, the refinery, the biggest refinery in Russia, 1,500 miles away from Ukraine.
Zelensky's told Sky News he wants a drone deal with the UK, including building a drone factory here in the UK.
Yeah.
What would that deal actually involve?
We've got this, what is going to be a terrific facility outside Swindon. It's a huge global drone hub. And it is all the best technologies are in one place. And already it's attracting quite a lot of attention because it's going to attract Russian attention as well. But it is a place where British technology, again, these startup technologies, can really work in developing drone assets very, very quickly and relatively cheaply. So we've got a lot to offer, again, on the technology side of it. What we can't do is produce at scale. So the idea is that linking as it were, British technologies and Ukraine's productive technologies, production ability, because they're fighting a war and because they've got a lot of skilled people. And remember, Ukraine, before that, when it was part of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was the weapons manufacturing part of the old Soviet Union. They produced rocket motors, they produced missiles. I mean, Ukraine had a very skilled workforce, and it comes off the back of a skilled workforce who know what they're doing with electronics and explosives and rocket motors and so on. So they can produce much more quickly at scale better than we can. But we have got a better handle on most of the modern technologies. And, there is some optimism to be derived, although I'm very sceptical about, Britain's ability to produce what it needs. In some respects, we are very good on the science and technology side. We're just not so good on the production side.
Let's talk about the politics for a moment here. So Andy Burnham decided he wanted Zelenskyy to be his first foreign visitor over, let's say, Macron, over, other possibilities he could have chosen. What does that say about Andy Burnham and the relationship between the UK and Ukraine?
Well, what it tells me, first of all, is that he's opportunistic, because this visit was an easy one to fit in, given that Zelenskyy has a more long-standing visit he's going to make to the United States this week, so let him come via the UK. He's been to the UK lots of times.
Yes.
And I think Burnham feels, in any case, that that's consistent with what Friedrich Merz in Germany would want to see and Macron in France would want to see. And this consensus around helping Zelenskyy in all of their different ways, and the French helped Zelenskyy in other ways, the Germans in other ways. We help more in terms of high tech because we haven't got the tanks and the ships and the planes to give them, whereas Germany increasingly has and France has. So we don't give as much hardware because we don't have it.
And when it comes to Andy Burnham and the fact that he said he wants to focus on domestic issues, Keir Starmer was quite heavily criticised by some of his critics for being never here Keir, for being abroad too much, for always, it looked like always being away. Now, many would say actually that's the job of a Prime Minister. Unfortunately, you are often buffeted by international issues and you can't always choose if you need to be going abroad. But nonetheless, Andy Burnham has said he's going to be laser focused on the UK and domestic issues. Do we believe that is realistic in a climate in which Ukraine and Russia are at war, US, Iran and also Israel are at war? Is that a little bit naive?
Well, I think he will struggle on that respect. All prime ministers find that they do spend a lot of time abroad. Some of them actually like it because they're more in control of events abroad than they are at home, actually. But Burnham will find that, in particular, this is a very volatile time in world politics in general. It's a very dangerous time for Britain. He's certainly got to find a way of reaching the target of 3% of defence expenditure within the next parliament, whatever that means, and 3.5% by 2035. And that's the NATO standard. At the moment, there is no pathway. And John Healey, who's now the Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he was Defence Secretary and when he resigned, and he made that famous comment in his letter, and he said it again, I think, in Parliament, he said, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, said, you are unwilling and the Treasury is unable to fund defence to the level that you have said you want it funded at. That to achieve what you've said, defence must do. So somehow, Andy Burnham has got to square his domestic orientation with finding a pathway. He hasn't got to do it immediately, but he's got to show that there is a pathway. And that we can sort of measure it by waypoints, what happens in the next budget, what happens in the autumn statement, etc., etc.
To an extent, defence spending was what did it for Keir Starmer. And I don't mean that as in that was the only issue, but it was kind of the nail in the coffin, right? Absolutely
right. It was the final nail in the coffin. And I keep saying, we've got a defence policy crisis in this country now. It's a crisis of spending. It is inadequate. John Healey was such a loyal member. And he's a man who doesn't look as if he wants to become Prime Minister. He just wants to do a good job. And when he came out and said, I can't work with you anymore, that was fatal for Keir Starmer.
Zelenskyy has done a long interview with Stuart Ramsay for Sky News. And he was quite critical of Europe and the UK not being ready, not spending enough, but also not actually having what we need to defend ourselves. And I was quite surprised at how frank he was that Europe and the UK are really not protected in the way they should be.
Oh, he's not wrong. His argument since 2022, when the Russians invaded the whole country, or tried to, is that we are fighting your war. Our war is your war. And Zelensky's line is that, of course we're grateful for what you give us, but we're not victims here. We are the front line of a European war. And, you, the rest of Europe, need to understand that you will have to do more. And he's only echoing what the specialists across all the European countries are saying. But what is interesting, and you're right about this, Mhari, in that he's brazen enough to say it. Zelensky, he's a great egotist. He's a type A personality. He's always got to be the man in control. And he hates the idea of turning up, being grateful and sort of bowing and scraping for all that we can give him. He turns up and he says, we're all in this. I'm a European leader, just like you. Our country's at war. Yours is going to be at war if you're not careful. And I'm telling you, leader to leader, you need to do much more.
And his style of leadership has been controversial within Ukraine. You talked about his controversial sacking of the Popular Defence Secretary last week on This Is Why. Would the UK have got involved behind the scenes, do you think? Do they have any influence?
Yeah, when we're talking about Fedorov here, the defence minister, and Zelensky, he's only in his post since January this year, and Zelensky dismissed him after 6.5 months, when he was doing a very good job and very popular with the public.
And that triggered protests, didn't it?
People turned out on the streets, particularly younger people who said, look, this is the man who can turn the war in our favour, and you've dismissed him because you're jealous. You're jealous of his popularity. And he's a tech bro, Fedorov. And so he's not, he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He's quite arrogant. He's got a swaggering arrogance of the tech bro. But he makes things happen. And he's got a political career. He wants to be he would like to be president. I'm sure that's true. So Zelensky's got a problem. He took a big misstep, I think. Most people would say that in dismissing Fedorov. Did the British have any influence yet? Not in the dismissal, but Britain and American sources, I know, expressed their disquiet. They made it really clear. Look, tell the president you're making a big mistake here, and you're not doing yourself any good with the public in Ukraine, and your political status is going to diminish because of this. So, in the event, not that much damage has been done to Ukraine's war effort, but damage has been done to Zelensky's political status. And they'll undoubtedly be reminding him of that when he gets to Washington this week. So, Britain and America did make their views known quietly because, they know that if Zelensky destroys or affects his own political credibility in the West, then that could be disastrous. You don't want a disastrous slide in Western support for Ukraine in general.
We've talked about the challenges of funding defence properly for the government. Will Burnham be able to continue to commit to funding Ukraine's defence in the future?
I don't think it's a question of funding Ukraine for 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, 10 years. It's more. And we've put in about 25 billion since 2022 by all forms. About 25 billion pounds worth of aid has gone into Ukraine. Quite a lot of that 25 billion is actually spent in Britain on things that we've produced ourselves to give to Ukraine. So it's produced jobs here and so on.
And that helps with growth and...
Absolutely. The United States is the big example. They put in... Donald Trump always says 350 billion. That's rubbish. They put in about 110 billion since 2022. And 90% of that 110 billion was spent in the United States. But, you can't tell that to a Republican. But we're now looking at a situation where Ukraine is a completely European country. It's effectively a NATO country. It may not be in the NATO treaty, but believe me, it's got NATO written all over it. As they say, it may not have got into NATO, but NATO certainly got into Ukraine. If you look at all of the arrangements and the production and the training and the fact that everyone's learning from the Ukrainian army, they're the best army in Europe at the moment because they've been fighting for 4 years pretty successfully. And in that respect, what we're looking at is not a future where Britain keeps on supporting Ukraine, but a future in which Ukraine becomes one of the big four. So I mentioned earlier, Britain, France, Germany are the big three. Italy used to be a big four. But now you'd say Northern Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Poland is one of the four now. It's a big country and it's really important. And Ukraine becomes number 5, joins the big four. It becomes one of the big 5 in European defence. And there's a lot to be gained from that. Although it's going to be a more dangerous world, there's a lot to be hopeful for, certainly in Northern Europe, if not in Southern Europe, if we get it right over the next 5 years.
Don't forget to email us at why@sky.uk and send us your suggestions for future episodes. And this is Why. We'll be back tomorrow.